Welcome to Scoop and Scale, a podcast where we dish up the science and weigh the facts about mostly equine nutrition. Today, we're going to talk about feeding off-track thoroughbreds. I'm Michelle Anderson, owner of Cadence Marketing and Media, where I create educational equine-related content and help veterinarians and businesses connect with horse owners. I'm a trail rider, a dressage rider, and an at-home horse keeper.
And I'm equine nutrition consultant, Dr. Clair Thunes of Clarity Equine Nutrition. I create individualized diet plans for horses, ranging from metabolic seniors to Olympic athletes. And I also consult for equine nutrition companies and help them with their formulations. I'm a scientist, dressage rider, and I'm a pony club mom.
Before we jump into our main topic today, I'd like to start with our segment called Michelle Asks Claire for Free Advice About Feeding Her Own Horses.
Okay, I'm ready. What have you got for me this time?
So as you know, I've been taking care of a 2-year-old. She's coming to Philly, who came out of a severe neglect case. We call her Olive. And when she got here, she was at a body condition of about a 2.5.
Okay, body condition. We should probably explain what that is, right?
Yeah.
So, that's a scoring system that was created actually at Texas A&M University back in the 1980s by a guy called Dr. Henneke. And he actually developed it for determining condition in broodmares and whether that had any effect on their ability to breed successfully. And we've taken that and we've extrapolated to use it on all horses everywhere to figure out if they're in good weight. So it's a system of objectively assessing fat cover over 6 areas of the body. And we give them scores from like 1 to 9, with 1 being emaciated and 9 being obese. And 5 is sort of deemed to be the ideal, where we'd like the majority of our horses to sit. Broodmares might be a little heavier, like a 6, and maybe a polo pony or a racehorse might be closer to us at 4.5. But, most of our horses, we want around about a 5. So you said she was a 2.5?
Yeah, 2.5. She wasn't in great shape when we got her. And it was right at the beginning of winter. And the first night she was home, it snowed. I followed the advice that you gave me and the advice that we got from the rescue that she was adopted from. And we did the UC Davis refeeding protocol, where she got alfalfa every 4 hours, and then we transitioned her onto a normal diet. But then, because she's young, she started growing like crazy, and she has gotten huge. Took her to the vet. The vet said, she's at a 4.5. We could get a little bit more weight on her. Worked really hard at it. But the more I feed her, the more she grows. And I have some concerns about a growing horse and making sure she's getting the right nutrition. What concerns are there when you're feeding these young horses, or what are the risks when they're growing of an imbalanced diet?
Yeah, I think that's the big part, right? Is an imbalanced diet. I had a mentor once said to me, which I thought was really interesting, that you can't make them grow faster than their genetic potential. Right. So we always think about fast growth and rapid growth and, being bad or whatever. And certainly there are links to overly rapid growth and joint disorders and the like. But, they do have a sort of a genetic potential. I mean, you can't make them grow faster than that. Right. You can't grow faster than your genes are set up to grow. The problem is when that growth is not good quality. And if you have rapid growth that's not well supported with the correct kind of diet, then you're going to have potentially like weak growth, right? Or and have joint issues and other possible issues. So generally, we try to steer away from rapid growth and just kind of go with something a little bit more moderate. So that's where the concern is for long-term joint health.
Yeah. So we've got her at about a 5, I would say. She is getting a lot to eat. So she's on 6 pounds of a performance concentrate, a pelleted performance concentrate. The 6 pounds is what's required. That's the minimum serving. And I know your advice, we have to do the minimum serving, or we have to balance that out with other supplementation if we're not doing that. So she's getting that. She's getting a hay pellet a hay extender, 6 pounds of that a day. She's getting all she can eat orchard grass mix hay and some flax on top of that, and then alfalfa also. The days are hopefully going to get a little bit warmer here. We're moving away from blanketing. How do I make sure that I don't put too much weight on her? Because honestly, it's really hard when you've seen a horse that was so emaciated. And it's very sad. I just want to feed her and feed her and feed her. So where should I stop? And what's the next step in?
Stop already. Time out.
Where did we go next? Like, what should she be eating as a 2-year-old? I think genetic potential, she's going to be well over 17 hands. She's over 16 already. She has a little bit more growing to do in her future.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it's worth just something you said, which really struck me is, she's at a 5 now, but you got her right about the beginning of November, if memory serves correctly. And so it's taken you 6 months, almost 6 months to get from a 2.5 to a 5. So I think that's really important to point out to people that that's how long it's taken you, right? And that's a good thing, right? So, while we're talking about rapid growth or whatever, you didn't do rapid weight gain and pile a bunch of pounds on her really quickly. It's taken that long to get her to where she's supposed to be. And, she's probably growing the way she's kind of supposed to. There's probably some what we call compensatory growth going on because she probably would have been a little bit behind earlier. But I think, you have a pretty cold winter climate up there. I know I've seen a lot of snow out your window sometimes when we've been chatting on Teams and Skype and stuff. So, some of her calorie need over the winter would have been just to keep warm. Right. So that part of it's going to go away now. I know you don't have pasture there. So she won't be getting anything from pasture grass. So you are still going to be giving her everything, she's going to be getting. But obviously her needs are going to go down now that she's not going to be keeping warm. And at 2.5, her growth, 2.5 years old, or is she rising 3 at this point?
No, she's coming to. She'll be 2.
Oh, she's coming to. Okay.
2.
Yeah. And even then, her growth rate is slowing down, right? She's going to grow more slowly from now on. So I would say the first thing, of all the things you're feeding right now, the first thing I would cut back on would be that performance feed. Right. And you made the point that you're feeding it the way you're supposed to at like 6 pounds a day, which is great. So that means that if you cut it back, if you don't have another source of fortification in the diet, you're going to have to add one. So I would probably look for a really nice ration balancer and cut back on that performance feed and add in some ration balancer. Maybe start off by cutting that performance feed in half and add half the recommended amount of ration balancer and see how she does with that. And you may find that you actually can get rid of all of the performance feed and start feeding her the full amount of ration balancer. And the nice thing about the ration balancers is that they're going to provide her with a source of quality protein. There's a big misnomer out there about feeding young horses high protein feeds because people think that is what causes joint disorders. And that's not true. That is bad research from the 1970s in large breed dogs where they fed super high protein food and they developed, I think it was in Great Danes actually, and they developed joint disorders, but they did not maintain the calorie content. So as they increased the protein content, they also unwittingly increased the calorie content. So the data was confounded, right? Because was it the extra calories that made them have joint issues or was it the protein? So when the research was redone by keeping the calories the same and just feeding higher levels of protein, they didn't have the joint issues. So it's not protein that causes joint issues. So that's a really, for anyone who's listening with young horses, I get that occasionally with people not wanting to feed ration balances because they're like, oh, it's 30% protein. It's going to cause joint problems. And that's not true. And in fact, it's really important that these young horses have quality protein in their diet, and those ration balances often rely heavily on soybean meal, which is a really nice complete source of protein with all the essential amino acids, and they often have added essential amino acids put in their pure essential amino acids like methionine and lysine added as well. So that's kind of where I would go next, and then you can kind of taper the pull up performance feed away first, and then if she starts to inch up above that 5, you got to be honest with yourself. if she starts getting a little plushy, then you can start, maybe pulling back on like the hay extender or whatever as well, and just, give her as much hay as she wants. But
yeah, do you recommend keeping growing horses at that 5 spot? Is that just the comfort zone as they're growing?
Yeah, I really don't like seeing young horses that are heavy, because they've got those growth plates that are not fully formed yet. And I don't think it's great for young horses to be being fat. It's no good for any horse to be fat, but especially those young horses with those underdeveloped growth plates carrying extra weight around. I'm okay with, being able to see a faint outline of ribs on young horses. And, certainly when they're younger than your mare, you'll see that a lot. They'll sort of get round, and then, then the butts will grow and they'll get a little skinny, and then it's like they're all over the place. But I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid by a faint outline of ribs.
Okay. It's hard to look at ribs when you saw them so skinny, but...
I know. But, and you can... Yeah, and it is literally just that faint. Like, it's like there are times where you just see them walking along and you think, can I see a rib there? That kind of, and the ribs should be right there. When you put your hand on them, they should be right under the skin. There shouldn't, that's what a 5 is. Ribs are not visually distinguishable, but are easily felt.
Okay.
That is the description of a 5. So you can't see them. If you can see the ribs, then the ribs score less than a 5. If you cannot see them, but you put your hand on and you're like, oh, yep, rib, then they're a 5. But what happens generally is you can't see them, and then you feel they're like, well, sort of in there, and then they become more noticeable the further back you go. So maybe you feel 2 or 3 at the end really easily, but the ones at the beginning you can't feel so easily. That's when you need to kind of be like, okay, we're good now.
Okay.
No more.
Okay. We'll work on transitioning her diet from her high calorie options and see how this goes with spring.
And I think and it's good for all of us, right, to remember that we need to feed our horses according to the work done, according to the conditions that they're kept in. So for a lot of people, they may be feeding more feed over the winter to help their horses maintain weight in colder, harsher climates. And now as we're coming into spring, they're not going to need that. And if you have a horse, especially that you're about to put out on pasture, that's a really, kind of important thing to remember, because they're potentially going to have unlimited access to grass as you're turning them, transitioning them to pasture. You need to think about pulling back your concentrate feed, perhaps to, think about your pasture replacing your concentrate feed. Don't leave them on the same amount of concentrate feed as you also put them on pasture. Otherwise, you'll end up with an overweight horse on pasture.
Well, here in the desert, I don't have to worry about the pastures.
Neither do I. But I have lots of clients who have to worry about the pasture.
Yeah.
So I know it's a thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I always appreciate your advice. I feel very lucky to get to ping you to help me with all of my horsey questions. So with that, hey, Claire, it's Kentucky Derby time.
It is. I don't have my hat.
But doesn't the call to the post get you like the goosebumps?
It does. I actually had a friend who was involved with a thoroughbred sort of rehoming program, and she was lunging a horse once and listening to the Derby, I think, on her phone, and the post sound went off and the horse totally lost it.
He was ready to go.
He was ready to go, and she didn't even think about it. She was just kind of like, oh my goodness, and she was just saying, yeah, exactly. And suddenly this horse was like, where are they? What am I doing? Where are So they don't forget.
No, and the first time I took my off-track thoroughbred mare to a dressage clinic, she definitely thought she was going to the races. She kept looking around for the track, and I swear she looked at all the dressage horses and was like, if this is who I'm racing, man, we got this one in the bag. But in honor of racehorses, I thought now might be a good time for us to talk about feeding racehorses as they transition from their careers on the track into civilian life as off-track thoroughbreds. I know it's something that we both have some experience with.
Yeah, I certainly have lots of clients who have taken off-the-track thoroughbreds into their homes, and they make great horses.
Yeah. And I think those of us, especially in the English disciplines, we all have that fond memory of off-track thoroughbred that taught us to go over cross rails or do our first 20-meter circles, and they end up being really cool horses. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into some questions about feeding these guys or gals as they're transitioning. A lot of the gastric health and nutrition research for horses mentions the racehorse diet. Can you give us a basic idea of what the researchers mean when they're talking about a racehorse diet, and how that diet might be different than our recreational or sport horses?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is that they tend to be, traditionally anyway, and in the United States, quite high in starch, right? So they're still fed with a lot more of the sort of traditional emphasis type concentrate feeds than perhaps we're using now in our sport horses. So where our sport horse concentrate feeds have kind of moved a little bit more towards moderate starch, like sort of 20-25% starch and sugar, and lean more heavily on fat and fiber. And you'll see a lot of sort of beet pulp and maybe 10-12% fiber in those feeds. The racehorse feeds are still very grain heavy and starch heavy. And, we'll have starch sugar contents up sort of 35-40%. And so that's just a very different looking feed than what we'll see fed to the sport horses.
So when I turned 40, I had a little midlife crisis. Instead of buying a car like a normal person, I bought an off-track thoroughbred. And she was beautiful.
The equine Ferrari.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I had spent so much time feeding easy keepers and working on increasing chew time and decreasing calories at the same time on my quarter horses and my warm bloods and my Arab crosses that I had forgotten what it was like to have a hard keeper. And we do often think of thoroughbreds as being hard keepers. Is that really the truth? Are all thoroughbreds hard keepers like this?
I don't think so. I mean, not all of them, no. I mean, that's the stereotype, right? That they are hard keepers. And for better or worse, stereotypes are rooted in some sense of reality. So I do think they are. And when they first come off the track, they can certainly be harder keepers. And, that's something we should talk about at some point is when they first come off the track. I mean, they do have that higher calorie demand. And I think we think, oh, well, they've just been racing and training so hard, and now they're sitting in my backyard not doing anything, or, I've turned them out to pasture to be a horse for 3 months or whatever before I get on them, and they don't need anything because they're not doing any work now. And that might not actually be correct, right? But yeah, I mean, they are definitely lean, as a breed, lean towards being slightly harder keepers than perhaps, the quarter horses and warm bloods that you were used to. And we don't really think about that when we look at our nutrient requirements. Like when I go to the National Research Council guidelines, which is a foundation of, where I get my data for what I should be thinking, what calories does a horse need, what their mineral protein requirements, all those kinds of things. Those requirements are based on work level and the horse's age, if they're growing or not, right? Or are they lactating? Are they broodmare and they're lactating? That kind of a thing. They're not set by breed, right? So, a thoroughbred that's working 5-6 days a week, in sort of an eventing training situation, is going to have the same caloric needs as the same sized warm blood doing the same training work, which, those of us who have been around horses for a long time know that's probably not going to be. They're not going to be exactly the same, right? Yeah. That's where the, rule of feeding of, feeding horses as individuals come in. So yeah, they tend to be a little harder to keep than, our Morgans and our warm bloods and some of our thicker blooded horses, perhaps, right?
Yeah. So with these horses, we talk about gastric ulcers, and or the research does that 90% or more of racing thoroughbreds probably have gastric ulcers. I think is what they've found, and you can correct me if you've seen results that were different than that. But should we just assume that when you get a thoroughbred off the track that it has gastric ulcers? Should you go ahead and do a scope? Is that part of that, of course, being a hard keeper and the challenges of getting weight on them in the transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I don't think it's unsafe to assume that they have ulcers of some type. I mean, gosh, we just had 5 horses in our barn scoped. Everything from horses that don't go anywhere and do anything to horses that show fairly frequently, and every single one of them had some kind of abnormality in their stomach, right? So, I'm looking at horses in a whole different way in general right now as it comes to ulcers. So, we do have the research and the statistics that show that it's, a really high number of racehorses that do have at least squamous ulcers. And so I think it's a fairly safe assumption to assume that, it would be worth treating them for ulcers when you first get them off the track. And that kind of goes hand in hand with, a recommendation I say to people whenever they get a new horse, regardless of that horse's background and type of horse. Like when you're moving a horse to a new location and putting it in a new lifestyle, a new routine, new owners, new handlers or whatever, that's stressful. We may think we have the most laid back, calm, relaxing environment, we can possibly offer a horse. And what could possibly, be stressful about that? But it is stressful, right, to that horse. And so they are at risk of developing ulcers. So it's a good thing to put them on a preventative ulcer guard treatment when you move them to a new facility, regardless of the kind of horse it is and what its background is. But certainly when you have a horse coming off the track, it's probably a safe assumption that it has ulcers. The gold standard is you should scope them. Right? Because we know now there are different kinds of ulcers and the way we treat them is slightly different, right? So the way we treat glandular ulcers is slightly different than the way we treat squamous ulcers. And if you don't scope, you don't know what kind of ulcers you have, and therefore you can't tailor your treatment to be the most effective. So you're potentially then spending your money unwisely because you could be spending a lot of money on a treatment that may not be the most effective treatment for the kind of ulcers that your horse actually has. So yes, in an ideal world, if you have the budget, scope them. If not, then I guess treating them for ulcers, talking to your vet about doing the GastroGuard for a month treatment of GastroGuard, then I would say you want to scope them at the end. Because you need to know whether that treatment was effective and whether they're actually clean or not before you stop the treatment. But it's definitely a conversation to have with your vet.
Yeah, I would say with the mare that I had, I did ultimately have her scoped, and she did have gastric ulcers, and that wanting to save money on the diagnostics, then I ended up spending quite a bit in other strategies that I had for trying to make her more comfortable, because I assumed she had gastric ulcers, but just between the feed and everything else, once we knew what was actually going on, it was an easier path to getting her healthy and happier under saddle and eating better, which was all important. Yeah.
Do you think you would have actually saved money had you scoped her initially and known what was going on?
That sounds like a spreadsheet. I know with her, and I don't own her anymore. She ended up being a horse that really liked jumping and was suited more towards eventing than, and I'm a dressage rider and a trail rider. That wasn't her gig. I spent a lot of money feeding that horse, especially during the first 6 months of her coming off the track. And then once I finally did the scoping, and then there's the cost of treatment, which isn't inexpensive to do.
No.
But at least you have a good idea that you've made progress.
So you didn't treat her as soon as you got her off the track, but you kind of went about, feeding her and treating her well and whatever. And then down the road kind of went, maybe we need to look for ulcers.
Yeah, am I going to get to being just a regular horse person and not someone who does everything right all the time? No, I did quite a bit of ulcer guard. That's over the counter. That's not a prescription.
Right.
It's omeprazole, like GastroGuard. It's the same drug, right? It's different dosing, different approval treatment versus prevention. and then I, did the supplements and the things and the free feeding and every kind of free feeder and hay bag under the sun. But at the end of the day, it's like you have to solve that problem for them. And she definitely had that lesson to teach me. So. But.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm in it right now with the gastric ulcers, and it's painful and it is not cheap. But yeah.
But so it's painful for us financially, but it's like literally painful for our horses. And I think that especially when we ask them to do, we do have to get them comfortable, and it is our responsibility that once we know, we have to do better by the horses. So anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
That's something.
I certainly do.
So, race training requires a lot of calories. I mean, these horses are working at high speeds in a really consistent program. And when my mare came off the trailer, like she came that morning, she had been at the track. She had done a workout the day before.
Wow.
Yeah. And she came off the trailer, and she was a lean version of the Incredible Hulk. It's like all muscle and veins and energy. This what I got. And when she got off the trailer, I was like, oh, what have I done? Thought that crossed my mind.
Fire-breathing dragon, come this way.
Yeah. The kite. She was on the end of the shank all the way to her new home. But we can't just assume that we can just feed them like a retired horse the first day off the track. So what recommendations do you have for making that transition and their caloric needs as they're transitioning from being race fit to being more regular horse fit?
Yeah, I think that's a mistake I see people making quite often. As you say, they come off, they do look like the Incredible Hulk. They're amazing to do like surface anatomy on if you need to identify muscle groups, because they're all like right there. You can see them all.
And it's amazing to see an animal that fit up close.
It's pretty,
it's impressive. So
they are impressive, and they're the reason why you can see those muscle definitions so well. One reason is like there's very little body fat, right? They're so lean, so much lean muscle. And so one of the things we don't often think about is the fact that lean muscle burns calories, right? It's one of the reasons why we women of a certain age are all told we should go to the gym and we should be, don't just run, you have to lift weights and do all those things too, right? Because if you build muscles and actually increase your lean muscle mass, your basal metabolic rate goes up, right? So your basal metabolic rate is literally your metabolism when you're just sort of sitting around not doing very much, right? You're burning calories and you have a lot of lean muscle. Muscle's very sort of energy demanding. And so that's one of the reasons why if you're fitter and you have more lean muscle mass, you actually burn more calories. And so if you're on a weight loss program, that's actually one reason why it's important to do exercise that helps you to generate more lean muscle mass, right? That's the whole point of that. And so these horses that come off the track that are that fit and have so much lean muscle, like their basal metabolic rate is way higher than, say, the mare you had at home that had just been doing, dressage training. If you just suddenly decided, I'm not going to ride you for the next 2 months, the change in her calorie need is not, is greater because she's, she doesn't have the same amount of lean muscle mass as that thoroughbred. That thoroughbred still has a much higher calorie requirement, even though he's not working, just because he's got so much lean muscle mass. And so the temptation is when you take them off the track, where they've probably been being fed 15 pounds-ish, per day of pretty high starch performance, racehorse feed, to kind of say, I'm just going to feed it hay now because he's not doing anything. And actually, then they'll drop weight like crazy because their caloric need is way higher than you think it is. So my recommendation is you don't want to be, and people are like, I don't want to feed all that high starch feed. They're not doing anything. Like you said, you had a kite on the end of a stud chain. That's not really a great thing to have now. It's not safe. It's not safe for you to be handling a horse that's, that high, and they're also become a bit of a danger to themselves, right? But they do need those calories to maintain condition. So gradually switching them to something that's a higher fat, high fiber performance feed, something that you would more routinely feed a regular sport horse, is my general recommendation, so that you just kind of switch them off of that high starch, low fiber racehorse food onto something with higher fat, high fiber, at a level, you were talking earlier about some of those feeds have that sort of 6 pound minimum serving size per day, at that kind of level to kind of help gradually take them down. So as they sort of unwind, then you can gradually scale it back, and obviously as much forage as they want to eat.
Yeah, I think it's easy for those of us who have horses and that try to be really educated and do right by our horses, and we get in this idea of they should have as much forage as they can eat without gaining too much weight, and the ration balancer is a great way to not overfeed them with a concentrate or other grain-based feeds or whatever it is, but I think that it's not black and white, and we have to remember, especially with these horses, that there's a transition, and we can't just go to what we think is right away. We have to work towards that.
And they're not used to consuming, they tend to have unlimited access to forage. So if you've ever been on the backside of a track, they have these massive hay nets hung up outside their doors, that they can pick from all day and night. But the reality is they may only be eating sort of 1% of their body weight per day as hay. And, they're probably eating 1.5% of their body weight per day as high starch concentrate. So they're just not really, the majority of the calories in their diet does come from concentrate. And so they're just not used to looking to forage as food, right? That's just not where they're not forage driven, perhaps the same way as the horses that we normally have are. So it can take them some time, and they may just not be that motivated to eat. Again, they're a little wound up. They're, a little bit kind of squirrel, looking over the stable door or whatever, and everything that's going on, and trying to figure out what their new life is. And it just may not be in their reality that to say, I should be eating more hay.
No. Yeah. And I think it would be a mistake to think that, you're taking the horse out of living in a stable where maybe that's not as natural as having turnout all the time and saying like, here, horse, you have this wonderful turned out life with all this forage. And that to them is as foreign as if you took a horse that's used to having all that turnout and put them in a stall for the first time. I don't know if you've taken a horse that's never been stalled and put them in a stall and they get stressed out.
Yeah, I actually rehomed a BLM Mustang, and he was in a large pen for a long time. Then I moved barns to a barn with a stall, and he was not good at trailering. So I spent a long time getting him good at going in a trailer to make the journey to his new fancy place where we were going to start doing real training. Mm-hmm. And that all went brilliantly. He got right in the trailer. It was a total champ. Got him out of the trailer at the other end. Went to go put him in his stall, which had beautiful white new shavings in it. Mm-hmm. And he refused to go in the stall. He wouldn't go in. And he was like looking at the shavings. And of course, Mr. Curiosity, right, puts his head down, exhales and blows the shavings, which then blew everywhere. So he went running backwards because he was just kind of like, what's that? And I just thought, oh my goodness, like it didn't even cross my mind that he wouldn't go in a stall, right?
Yeah. And I would say with my mare, when I went to put her in turnout like that, to her was very different for her and pretty stressful. And so I think we do have to look at their history and their perspective as we introduce them into our management.
Right. I will say that they often do if you can get them in a good turnout situation, most of them will have spent the first 18 months of their lives out in group pasture. So once you remind them, they actually do really well. I know thoroughbreds that live out in group pasture settings and do really well because they actually do know how to be a horse. They've forgotten how to be a horse, but they did learn how to be a horse. Whereas I know some warm bloods that never had the luxury of being turned out in a hurry, even as a foal, they were kept in a much more dry lot with mom only type situation and never got group turnout with a group of horses. And they never learned to be good in turnout in a group situation. So
yeah. And the bookend to her story is that once she got used to turnout, she loved it, and she would prefer to be out rather than being in a barn. So it just takes time, and we can't assume that they are going to appreciate it right off the bat. So
right. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's a message down there in general, I think, about what we think our horses should appreciate versus what they actually appreciate. There's a little spend some time with that one.
Yeah. We might need to have a psychologist on to help us through that one. So we talked with the off-track mare that I had that she did have gastric ulcers, and that was challenging as far as keeping weight on her. She didn't want to eat forage, and even after she'd had access to it for a long time, she would much rather be delivered a concentrate to eat. What recommendation do you have to help those horses make the transition? Because ultimately we do want them eating forage as the main part of their diet.
Yeah, I think a lot of them have hindguts that aren't functioning super optimally when they come off the track, and that's due to a couple of reasons. One is the amount of high starch grain that they're fed. They tend to be fed twice a day. At least the majority of the race barns that I've been in feed twice a day. So if you're feeding 15-ish pounds of 30-40% starch grain a day, even divided into 2 meals, at 7.5 pounds per meal. And those horses are not that big, right? They might be 1,100 pounds, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 pounds, depending on their age and, just where they are, their growth and fitness and whatever. So ideally, you wouldn't really want to feed more than 4 or 5 pounds of that level of starch feed in one meal to them, but it just doesn't work with the way that the track schedules really function to get them more meals a day. Some trainers do figure it out how to get them a third meal a day to break that down to smaller meals, but most are fed twice a day. So there's a chance that some of that high starch feed is actually moving through the small intestine too quickly, and that starch isn't being digested in the small intestine, is ending up in the hindgut. And if it ends up in the cecum and colon, that starch is very readily fermented, and over time it starts to actually alter the population of microbes in the hindgut away from microbes that predominantly ferment forage towards microbes that predominantly ferment starch. And so you've shifted that bacterial population, and that may be one reason why they're not super into eating forage either. They're not stupid. They kind of know that they're not doing a very good job of it. And so helping to rebalance that hindgut can be really beneficial. So I really like using some of the prebiotics that are out there. I don't do a lot with probiotics. I'm not always convinced. Probiotics are supposed to be alive when they get to the hindgut. They're live bacteria that when they get to the hindgut, they can sort of reproduce and recolonate that hindgut. The question is, do they get through the really acidic stomach alive? And if not, then they're dead on arrival and they kind of act like a prebiotic. So I think there are some good probiotics out there, but I think a lot of the ones that people could just grab generally may not do what they think it's going to do. So I tend to lean more towards the prebiotic and postbiotic type compounds. So those are things like you'll see them on labels as MOS, which is short for mannan oligosaccharides, or FOS, FOS, which is short for fructooligosaccharides. Those are carbohydrates chains that the beneficial bacteria in the hindgut really like to live on. And then you get some other, compounds like the Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeasts and things. Those have been shown to help stabilize the hindgut, to help improve feed utilization, especially forage. So I like to get some of those in there as well. And you'll find those in good prebiotic products. If you are going with something live, when you look at your label, you're looking for those colony forming units, which will be abbreviated to CFUs. And you need to be looking for probably 50 billion or more CFUs a day. And the majority of probiotic products out there, when you look at those CFUs, it might be like 10 million. And you just think, wow, that's great. 10 million, that's a really big number. But to put it in perspective, the research has been done suggests that to be effective, those numbers need to be like 50 billion. So just keep that in mind when you're shopping for probiotics. And then, looking for those prebiotic yeasts and things is what I lean on.
Yeah. So the prebiotics feed the microbiome or
Yeah, exactly. And then there's this whole conversation right now about postbiotics. There's a bit of, people sort of saying, oh, that's just a made up term that somebody's come up with in order to sell more product to differentiate them from other people. But actually, postbiotic is a term approved by, and I've forgotten the name of the organization now, but there's like an international organization of like pre-probiotic type peoples. And I'll have to get the name and come back with that one. And anyway, postbiotic is an internationally approved term is what I'm getting at. So it's not something that a company just made up to sell more product. Actually, it's a known. No, it's not just a marketing jargon. Like they some of these products that are out there actually more accurately fit under the banner of postbiotic than they do under the banner of prebiotic. So they're actually labeling themselves more accurately now. And so postbiotics are kind of what you have at the end of a yeast culture, where you've sort of grown yeast and it's all the byproducts that yeast creates, and maybe that yeast is exploded and it's all the goodies that they've created themselves. And so there are sort of biologic compounds that have been shown to have benefit. They have a good benefit on equine immune function in the digestive tract, and in helping to stabilize the hindgut as well. But yeah, those are others. So the prebiotics and postbiotics are where I tend to look more than probiotics.
And so thoroughbreds also often seem to get a bad rap for their feet and hoof quality. So I've had 2 off-track thoroughbreds, and both of them ended up having really fabulous feet. And I am really into hoof care, and I do my own trimming. So this is something that I get really excited about. My understanding is that a lot of what we see in horses coming off the track as far as having poor hoof quality has to do with the kind of exercise they're doing and the surfaces that they're on when they're training, and then also standing in a stall and not moving around so much and being in bedding, and that might have urine in it and different things that are hard on hoof health, and it just doesn't add up well to having a nice, healthy hoof. But what are some ways to support the horse's feet and help them grow? Because it's going to take us probably 6 to 9 months to grow out that hoof capsule, and really good hoof care in that transition. What nutrition recommendations do you have to support that hoof growth and the horse going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. You raise a really good point about the kind of footing and things they've been on. For people listening who haven't been on the backside of the track, like, they're in, I don't know what they're like, 12 by 12 stalls, and they're often bedded well over a foot deep in straw. They're really bedded, and around the stalls is often a track around the stalls that's sand. So they can come out and they'll hand walk them around that, or the trainer can watch them potentially just jog in hand or whatever on that sand to make sure they're sound. So they'll be out on that. And then most of the walkways from there to the track are often some kind of improved footing as well. And then, of course, they get to the track and it's improved footing. So they're always, so then you take them off the trailer when you get them to your house, and you get them off the track and you walk, and you on the gravel, and you go, oh my gosh, it's lame. Right. And the poor horse is like, walking on eggshells because, it's just not used to that. They're also getting washed off every day. So there's a lot of wetting and drying cycles and moisture as well, which can be hard on feet. All those things are a challenge. So from a nutritional standpoint, just making sure you have a really good balanced diet, right? Which I know sounds cliche, but it's true, right? I mean, it's one of the things we see, as I said again, over and over again, is, people not feeding their feeds the way they're designed to be fed, right? So if you're not following the feeding directions, then you're probably going to be deficient in some pretty important hoof health related ingredients like zinc, copper, your methionine, essential amino acid, that kind of thing. So making sure that you're feeding a fortified feed and feeding it the way it's designed to be fed, is really important. And that'll definitely help your feet in the long run.
Well, I am going to assume that as an equine nutritionist, you have had people with Thoroughbreds contact you and say, how much biotin does my horse need? Or which biotin does my horse need? So, and then, that's what we all think, it's all biotin. What are your thoughts on biotin and if that's going to help with the hoof health?
It can. Yeah, it certainly can. So biotin, there's definitely some good research showing that biotin can help, but particularly biotin's really, strong point is helping with shelly feet. So feet that just kind of crumble, kind of at the hoof, where the hoof wall intersects with the ground. If you've got crumbly feet and they just keep breaking down, biotin can really help with that. But that's really what biotin's good for. The thing is, like you alluded to, it takes months for that to do anything. But the research shows that feeding biotin can help those kinds of foot issues. And interestingly, they were quite long studies, obviously, because they needed to wait that long to see if it was effective. And then at least one of the studies, they actually removed the biotin and looked to see what happened, and the feet deteriorated again. So certainly for those particular horses, the biotin was beneficial. And biotin's a B vitamin. Horses make their own B vitamins in their hindgut. They're byproducts of microbial fermentation. So if you have a healthy hindgut, you should have healthy feet, right? But as we just alluded to earlier, like they may not have particularly healthy hindguts because of all the grain they've been fed that could be getting in there and kind of messing with the microbial balance. So, a big focus again on your foot health is getting that hindgut health and digestive tract health where it needs to be. That's really going to show dividends in your foot health. And even though, we've not seen biotin deficiencies identified because horses make their own biotin, there is evidence that at least in certain individuals, feeding additional biotin can be beneficial. So it's possible that they're not always making the optimal amount of biotin, even though they're making enough in inverted commas, right? So yes, for certain individuals, you can add more. And my preference, I would add biotin from a straight biotin supplement. Most of the time when I have people coming to me with horses that are on hoof supplements, I freak them out because I take them off their hoof supplements and we end up changing their foundational grain that they're feeding or commercial feed that they're feeding. Because what I generally find is that people are not feeding their commercial feed properly. So then their horse's feet start falling apart. So then they go get a hoof supplement. And when I put them on the correct commercial feed and we feed it properly, that is then meeting all their copper and zinc and hoof-related requirements, and they don't need their hoof supplement anymore. And people get very worried when I tell them that I've taken their hoof supplement out of their ration, and they're like, but he has bad feet. And I'm like, yes, but he, that's partly because you were feeding a feed with a minimum 6-pound serving size at £1 per day. So you weren't getting enough copper and zinc. So you needed your hoof supplement. Now I'm hoping that we've put you on, say, like a ration balancer, or we've increased the amount of grain to the required 6+ pounds or whatever it was. My hope is that you won't need that hoof supplement anymore. But biotin, I think if you want to add biotin, you can find there are products out there that are just biotin.
I think that one of the most interesting things about getting really up close with your horse's feet is that the hoof gives you a history of that horse's health, and you can see, like with my mare, you could see the time she came off the track and the transition and the change in the hoof. So it's really an interesting indicator that maybe not all horse owners are looking at, but definitely worth taking a peek at.
Oh, for sure, it's fun
on feet. Yes.
No, it's fun looking at feet like that. And people worry that those lines are founder rings. They're not founder rings. That's something different. Yes, you do get rings in the feet when they founder or get laminitis, but any change in diet can cause changes of, like no different, like a notch in your own fingernail, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When your lifestyle changes, if you become stressed or something, you'll get like a notch in your nail or something like that. And it's the same in the horse's feet. So, yeah.
And so going back to our discussion on body condition scoring, how can off-track thoroughbred owners use that to guide them through their horse's transition as they're changing their diet?
Yeah, I think it's a good tool, right, to understand how to body condition score, and to do it on a, I suggest people do it on a monthly basis, and just to kind of see how they're changing. And I think, they're going to look like, they often come off when they're on the track, or when they first come off the track, they often look a bit like whippets. Mm-hmm. Right? They kind of have that slightly sucked up look. And some of that is just because they don't have a lot of hay fill, right, in their hindgut, because they're not eating as much hay as they hopefully will be once they transition to living with you. And so they don't have as much sort of bulk in their gut. And some of that, I think, is I see that sometimes, just that slightly pinched in look, especially in front of the hip bones. To me, that's often a little bit of a red flag of some hindgut disruption. Like they're just a little uncomfortable and kind of, I don't know, I personally kind of call it tight in the gut, just kind of, a little uncomfortable looking. And so that will tend to go, as they relax and everything starts to relax, they'll just develop a slightly softer, look about them, if that makes sense. So this is sort of the arty, slightly woo-woo side, and the not so sciencey side. It's hard to describe. I know it when I see it, right? And you're probably the same when you've been around horses a long time. You just see horses, you're like, that horse just doesn't. They're not happy in their gut or whatever. They just don't look, super happy. And that changes over time. But yeah, using that condition scoring chart to help you determine whether or not you've got enough. And again, you can run into, like you were struggling with your young horse, that sense of, that they were so lean when they came off that you just keep feeding them the groceries. And there's a point where, and you can just get it in your head that they're a hard keeper, and you need to step back and kind of go, oh, they actually look just fine now.
Yes. Yeah. And
there's that, I was going to say, there's that point that you reach where they reach a good condition. And then you have to watch and see, is that amount of feed that you're feeding them now going to push them over the edge into too much condition? Or is that actually the amount of feed they need to maintain that good condition that they've reached?
I think another good tool is just taking photographs, like regular side profile pictures of the horse.
I love that.
Yeah. And
I love that. Totally. I have all my clients provide me with photographs. I have a number of angles that I have people shoot, and I always tell people to take the photograph from the non-main side. Because if, we all like the pretty picture of the horse with his mane, but I can't see the top line, and you can hide a multitude of sins under a mane, right? I can't tell you how many cresty necks have gotten hidden under a mane.
Yeah.
So when you turn the horse around the other way, suddenly it's like, oh. So, turn the horse around, take the photograph, stand them up like a confirmation shot, like you're trying to get them ready for a sales picture, right? And try to get them to stand square, at least stand square in front, even if they're split behind. Have them look straight ahead, because if they look at you, you look like a weird horse with a massive head, right? And take that side-on photograph, and then take a photograph from directly behind. Have them stand square behind. Doesn't matter what they're doing so much with their front feet at that point. Stand them up square behind and take that photograph from like 4 or 5 feet back, because like from the hocks up. Because that's a really interesting picture, especially when you have these sort of angular thoroughbreds, because they tend to be really often quite sloped, and very pronounced muscle development in their glutes and stuff in the hind end. And so you can see how that's changing over time by taking that hind end picture. So that's another really good one that I like to take.
So that is all the time we have to talk about off-track thoroughbreds. But before we go, I wanted to see if there's anything that you want to make sure the audience understands about these horses and their nutrition.
I just think they make great. I'm just thrilled that so many people are, looking to off-the-track thoroughbreds and that there's been a real shift in the industry to finding these horses second homes, and that the original breeders are getting involved with making sure these horses land in a soft place after their careers. So many of the trainers are doing the same. And there are some great rehoming programs out there that you can work with that some of them have even put some time on these horses off the track before they send them on to you. So you don't have to do what you did and get one right off the track. Be off the track.
and I would say that would be my parting thoughts, is that you can do that. And those horses have been transitioned by people who have done it before and have a program that they follow and professionals with that. And then you will get the horse that you're going to have for the rest of your time with that horse, instead of the horse that came off the track, because those might be two very different animals.
Very true. And I do think, as great as it is that we're rehoming so many of these horses, I do think, I do want to put it out there to be a little cautious too, because, it is these horses, when they first come off the track, they are a lot of horse. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there are you with decades of horse experience realizing, oh, shoot, that's a lot of horse, right? And I think
that's what I thought.
Right. And I think there's a temptation, especially for people on a budget, to go and get these horses, because they're often quite cheap. Let's be honest, right? Like they're, moving them on for often not a lot of money. And so people that are on more of a budget, they appeal to them, and that's great. Just know that they may not be cheap to manage, right? Like you were saying, with all the gastric, care that might be needed, all the food that we talked about them needing. They're going to need a lot of calories and feed when they first come off the track. That you do need to have a pretty sizable savings account to help transition those horses carefully, and potentially corrective shoeing or, whatever. So, I think that's something I would, just make people realize, that while the cost of the actual horse may not be a lot because they're, being rehomed or what have you, they can be quite expensive to keep right off the bat anyway. But they're great horses, right? I mean, the good ones go on for years and years and years, and they try their hearts out for their owners, and they're so flexible. I mean, they can excel in dressage, they can jump, they can trail ride, they can do barrels, really the world's the limit as far as what a good off the track thoroughbred can do. And they're tough. If they come off, sound, they're often really tough.
Yeah, and smart. They're very, very smart horses.
Yeah, they are,
from my experience. So, okay, with that, we hope that all of you listening have learned something new that will help you better take care of your own horses, or perhaps you're kicking around the idea of bringing an off-track thoroughbred home. If you'd like to be part of our future conversations, please send your suggestions for topics and your questions to info@scoopandscale.com. Again, that's info@scoopandscale.com, and is spelled out. You can also find Claire at ClarityEquine.com. For the Scoop and Scale podcast, I'm Michelle Anderson.
And I'm Dr. Clair Thunes.
Thanks for riding along with us.